next, we're moving on to Graham. Graham Bash, welcome. Now, Graham was a Labour Party member for 52 years before being expelled. He was a founder of the newspaper Labour Briefing and is the political officer for Jewish Voice for Labour. Welcome, Graham. It's good to see you this evening.
And it's good to be here, comrades. I firstly want to say I'm essentially with Ian's emphasis on the need for unity and focusing on the trade unions and focusing on the threat from Reform UK. Now, I don't agree with the main premise, I think, of the first two speakers, that the results were disappointing. I think we need to look at the bigger picture. And that bigger picture isn't that in a couple of constituencies, a couple of socialists stood against each other. I'm sorry, comrades, but that isn't really the main issue. And it doesn't explain the election results. And I don't agree it's about immediately trying to create a new electoral vehicle. Now, the results were as good as they could reasonably have been. Why do I say that? Firstly, because the Tories were smashed. Why does it matter? Because the Tories are now out of the equation, and it will be a straight conflict between our movement, our Labour movement, and a Starmer, wretched Starmer government. And there's no intermediaries in the way. And I think that that is the big picture. The second big picture is that in Islington North, there was a stunning victory for Jeremy Corbyn. Thank goodness there was. I think a lot of us here today would be having a very different feeling and approach had that not happened. And thirdly, because of the issue of Gaza, and David's right on this, I mean, there's been a sort of shifting of the tectonic plates, and the main division in society is between the elite and the mass of people. And this was expressed in what I think is the third major gain at this election, which was that the independents did extremely well, not just the four who won, but also people like Leanne Mohammed, who came within 528 votes of unseating the wretched Wes Streeting, and Andrew Feinstein. And it shows, I think, that the flame of opposition to the establishment, and I say actually the establishment parties, is very much alive. Note here, no one standing for a left party, and I exclude the Greens, was elected. None. Now, as you said in your introduction, Esther, it's a fragile electoral base for Labour. We know about the votes going down compared with 2000 and even 2019, and the vote share nowhere near as good as 2017. Also in Wales, the vote down 4%, in London 5%, and therefore it goes beyond a Muslim disaffection. I think that progressives, people on the right side of the Gaza divide, were actually so disgusted, and there was this disengagement shown by the rotten turnout of barely 60%. As, what's his name, John Curtis, the electoral analyst, said, it was not that the Labour won the election, rather that the Tories lost it. And they won also because 4 million votes went to Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, their vote amounted to about 40% of Labour's vote. And it represents a real threat, danger for the Labour movement, as Ian said, a threat that could materialise sooner than we're prepared for. We need to look at the lessons of France, where although they were pushed back, it ain't going away there. And that is our possible tomorrow. In Germany, Italy, Holland, there are major warning signs of a rise of the far right. Now, look, what kind of government are we going to be facing? The Starmer government will have the shortest of honeymoons, probably already over. Unlike Blair's government in 1997, it will have little leeway for concessions, no answer to the UK's economic crisis other than to attack the living standards of the majority of the population. The government could be a car crash, and its policies, except at the margins, are effectively those of the Tories, which is not at all saying that the Labour Party is effectively the same as the Tories. So talk of alternative parties are premature. We're not at that stage. Not one left party candidate won, as I said, and the task is to build a grassroots movement of resistance, to unite and connect the struggles in the trade unions, in the campaigns and beyond. Now, we saw the embryo of this with the armies that came up for Jeremy and the independents, which he called the kernel of a mass political movement. Just one word about the independents. I should say, in case I'm attacked for this later, certainly 3 of the 4 independents, other than Jeremy, were brilliant, I think, when I've heard them. There is clearly, the jury's out on the Blackburn person who won. We don't know. We know he stood against good old Craig, who is a really good comrade, but we'll see what happens. So what is clear is the necessity for the left to work together to build on these mobilisations, much of which already evident well before the election, including the massive struggle for Palestine, wonderful demonstrations, the grassroots campaigns on meeting housing need and addressing climate change. And the hope and optimism that was there when Jeremy was elected Labour Party leader has not died. Now, that resistance is more than ever needed against what could be a resurgent right. And let me just say this, that resurgent right will have Starmer as its standard bearer, sorry, not Starmer, I meant Farage, Freudian slip. It will have as its standard bearer in Parliament. Now, what is possible? It's not Chris, who I think the world of. It's not the call to come and join us. No one has that authority, not even Corbyn. I've asked by quite a few to come and join us by a number of organisations. Indeed, I remember Tony Greenstein only last year telling me to join the SLN as the only game in town. Now, Chris, most of the left, let's spell it out comrade to comrade, most of the left won't join a party led by George. Some wouldn't even vote for him. For the record, I would have done, because Gaza was the main issue, clearly in that election. But he is the main public voice of the Workers' Party, whether we like it or not, and I certainly don't. But his positions on asylum and refugees, sending the British Navy to keep out illegal refugees, on abortion rights, on gays and lesbians not being normal, on trans rights, and on the central issue of climate change, he's ruled himself out. Now, what is possible is developing a network between the various groups resisting this government. No exclusions. So I don't think much of George, but we can't exclude him. I haven't got much time, bluntly, and I'm sorry to say this publicly, for Owen Jones. If I exclude you, comrades, then you'll exclude me. We'll be left with no one. And we have to develop a programme that is sharp on the fundamental issues. And comrades we don't like may well exclude themselves. Above all, it's got to be as broad as possible, rooted in the trade union struggles and beyond. And yes, comrades, reaching out to the tens of thousands of socialists still in the Labour Party. And then, on the basis of this movement, try to link with the few socialist MPs, Jeremy, independents, yes, left Greens, and yes, some Labour MPs, Diane Abbott and co, to give a parliamentary wing to this resistance. We need to look at France. The threat is still there, and the lesson is that the only way to combat what is potentially a mass movement of the right is to build a mass movement on the left. It doesn't mean to say we have to agree with each other, but on the fundamentals, we do. And I think this network is a prelude to what may be the beginning of a new party. Now, I say maybe because, of course, the Labour Party is at the stage where it could possibly be qualitatively changed if the trade unions disaffiliate. There's just one last thing. I'm be totally remiss if I didn't say something about what David said about Jeremy. Now, I'm in an awkward position here, to be honest. I totally agree he could and should have done better resisting the witch hunt. I totally accept that. My partner, Jackie Walker, was a victim of him. I was actually a victim of David Evans, so that was easier to deal with. Let's just remember this. Jeremy had against him the entire might of the ruling class in this country. There were even threats from the army that there would be coups in the event of him winning. He had, of course, the Tories, he had the media, but above all, he had the most reactionary body in the country, which was the Parliamentary Labour Party. And against those wretches, he had a few good comrades who were able to, who did their best to defend him, including, of course, Chris Williamson. And the way you were treated in return, Chris, and Ken Livingstone, and actually Mark Wadsworth and Jack, and all of this isn't good enough. But to fight the ruling class, and that's what it was, you would need it to be both, one, a revolutionary, and two, to have an army of resistance that could actually give you the strength to fight them. He didn't have the second, that had yet to be built. And Jeremy, for all his wonderful thoughts, and they are pretty wonderful, is no revolutionary. And that has got to be the context in which we judge him, rather than all of us from the comfort of our Zoom meetings, never facing that daily. Do you remember, was it on the bombing of Syria, I think it was, when he opposed it, and you had Hilary Benn and all the mob behind him screaming at him, and he stuck to his guns. So, yep, I accept the criticism of Jeremy, and yes, can we please put it in context? And our job isn't just to criticise, it's to build an alternative so that comrades we put in the leadership of our movement at least have resources to rely on, or else we are just part of the chattering classes criticising from the sidelines. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you for that strong message, Graham, and that absolutely relevant point that there are no Tories, so it is Labour, and now the left, and we must organise. So it's building on those fundamentals then that is key, and what excludes somebody? Do they exclude themselves? So I hope that the panel will come back to those questions later.